given that you have that sort of distaste for those activities, given that you equally have a distaste for the coarsening and cheapening of cultural life, you nevertheless remain firmly committed to the very economic and political system which, in my view, is largely responsible for that cheapening and diluting and sensationalizing and vulgarizing of culture. That's what I really don't understand.
Well, that's a very good point to make, and I would respond in the following way, that this cheapening and commodification of culture that you rightly criticize is to be observed everywhere, and was to be observed just as much in the so-called socialist states that prevailed in Eastern Europe in my youth and in your youth. It doesn't seem to have been resisted in anywhere by any political action, partly because I think it isn't in itself simply the result of any political decision. It's something that has come about entirely because of prosperity, because of the ways in which people can make easily available the cheaper forms of entertainment without there being any authority to criticize them. And in your view, I mean, if you were in charge, I suspect it would be a bit more you would go back a little bit more towards the Catholic Inquisition about all this, actually examining cultural products and saying, you know, which should we allow?
That's right. Everybody would have to read Brecht 3 times a day.
Yes, that sort of thing. But
Roger, as you know, I'm no defender of the cultural policies of the Soviet Union. I've spent most of my life fighting for Stalinism.
But the problem is, what is the alternative?
Well,
we agree that there's a problem.
Well, I don't think we agree on the definition of the problem. I spent most of my life fighting Stalinism in political terms and also in cultural ones, but I don't agree that the problems of culture under Stalinism are anything like the problems of culture under market society. They're no better. They may well be worse. You know, if you have an authoritarian state telling artists what to write, otherwise they're carted away to prison. Sure, that's actually worse than, you know, the dumbing down of culture under late capitalism. All I'm saying is one has to diagnose 2 different conditions here. And the condition, and what I don't understand about your position, is that the specific forms of vulgarization of culture which exist under capitalism you rightly deplore, and you support the very framework which generates them.
I'm not known for advocating economic theories. I suspect that I would support whatever is necessary by way of economic activity for there to be universities in the first place. But I would agree with your position that universities should be, especially in the humanities, critical vis-a-vis the surrounding order. That is the function of culture. And I think you said that this has ceased to be in some way, but I think that it's ceased to be largely because people in universities and in schools have neglected that function of culture, that it should inject into the ordinary way of thinking those critical ideas which enable people to distance themselves from, you know, the obvious temptations of economic life.
But I think the distancing is part of the problem here. The way culture and the humanities were actually set up historically, the way if you like, the origin, the modern origin of the humanities or of culture, was in that necessary distancing from themselves from an increasingly industrial society, so that values which were really dysfunctional in that society were increasingly, as it were, expelled and had to be preserved somewhere else. You had to have an enclave which actually preserved these values. You call it the arts or the humanities or university or culture, it doesn't matter. The problem, however, and I think this is, you see that side of it, Roger, and you applaud it, and so do I, but I see another side too. That distance is also crippling. That distance, which is necessary, as it were, to preserve those values in some utopian or residual way, also means it's impossible to bring them actively to bear on social life.
But how would you close the distance without the apparatus of censorship?
You and I both were at the same college in Cambridge and knew each other and knew Raymond Williams, who was my mentor, if you like. Now, when Williams talks about the culture and society tradition, he is indeed talking about figures who want to preserve certain kinds of value from the depredations of industrial capitalism, all the way from almost Burke to Lawrence. But he's also talking, not least in the case of people like William Morris and to some extent Wilde, about people, the point where that tradition as it were, sees that the only way forward is to try to link these values to a political movement. Now, that's where, of course, you will pull back, because a typically conservative view is that culture is one thing and politics is another. If that is the case, I'm afraid there's no way of bringing these values to bear on everyday social practices. That's my problem with this position.